my name is Marian. I'm from the blog Miss Mustard Seed, and I am starting a series on how to slipcover a wing chair. Now, you can actually use this tutorial to slipcover just about anything, from an ottoman to a sofa, any style of chair. I'm just going to teach you the techniques that you need to know in order to be able to make a slipcover for just about anything. Now, I actually made this series a few years ago, but it was poorly lit. You could hear my kids in the background. It was hard to see exactly what I was doing. The sound was terrible. So hopefully this video will be a little bit easier to watch and will be just as informative, because I know a lot of people use that series to make slipcovers, even people who have never sewn before. So if you feel like sewing slipcovers are a little bit beyond your ability, or maybe a lot beyond your ability, I hope this video will take out the intimidation factor and will show you just how easy it is when you take it step by step. What kind of fabric should you use when you're making a slipcover? I would suggest a fabric that's thick enough so that it has some structure when you actually piece it together. If you're using a fabric that's really, really thin, first of all, it's going to wear out faster. It's also pretty likely that you'll see the pattern from the old fabric through it. And as I said, it just won't have a lot of structure. It'll look sort of slouchy and it'll probably wrinkle a little bit easier. So you want to use a fabric that's a little bit thicker. I would suggest like a decorator weight fabric, something that's graded for either upholstery or curtains, pillows, that sort of thing. We're going to use these antique hemp sheets. And I know these can be hard to find. They can also be a little bit on this expensive side, but I absolutely love the weave. I love the way they wear. Even though they're sort of, I would say white, but they're actually an off-white, sort of a cream. They're really forgiving when it comes to stains, and I just love the way they look. You can also use, though, in my first series, I used drop cloths, painter's drop cloths, and you can use that. You can also use like a sanded twill is a good option. Anything that's like in the denim twill family, or just a regular decorator fabric that has a pattern on it. I would try to stay away though from stripes, checks, and plaids if this is your first time. Because if you get the pattern crooked, it's going to be really obvious. So if you're going to go with a pattern, use an all-over floral pattern that really doesn't have like an up or a down side. So if it's a little bit askew, it's not going to look off. So make things easier on yourself and either work with a solid pattern or something that has an all-over print, like a large-scale floral or even something like a paisley. Now to start, we're going to start off by measuring out the piping that we need for the chair. So the kind of piping or cording that I'm using is just an 8/32 of an inch cotton cording. And this is what you use to make any kind of custom piping, whether it's for pillows or a slipcover or for upholstery, whatever you want to put sort of that piped edge on. It's really great for pillows. It gives a nice finished look. And what it does with the slipcover is it helps to sort of draw your eye to the lines of the furniture, and it also helps with giving it a little bit of structure, again, so it doesn't look slouchy. If you don't have any piping, it can look a little slouchy. So in order to measure how much I need, I'm just going to run the piping around the chair. So this is how much I'll need for the arm, and since I have 2 arms, I'm going to go ahead and double that. And then I know I want it up around the wing. So again, I'm just going to measure it with the piping. And again, I have 2 of those, so I'm going to double that. And I want it to run along the back. Now I buy piping in these humongo rolls because I do a lot of upholstery and slipcover making and sewing and stuff like that, but you can get these, you can buy this just by the yard at like Joann Fabrics or Hobby Lobby, really anywhere that sells fabric. Okay, and I'm going to put a length of piping around, all around the bottom of the chair. We're going to put a little skirt along the bottom. And then around the cushion. I like to start out making the piping. So then once I start pin fitting, I don't have to keep stopping and making more piping. It's just all done so I can pin and sew, and get things done a little bit quicker. So I'm going to cut the fabric that I need for the piping. And in the video series that I made a few years ago, I cut all of the fabric straight, just in straight strips of that were maybe about 2 inches wide, which you can definitely do that. I did that for years because I didn't want to waste fabric by cutting it at an angle. But I have since started to cut my piping fabric at an angle, which is called on the bias. And when you do that, it makes the piping lay flatter, and it's just a little bit easier to work with. It sort of bends around the curves of the arms and stuff a little bit easier. So if you can, I would suggest cutting your fabric on the bias. If you can't, then go ahead and cut it straight, and that's fine. Just know down the road you might want to start cutting it at an angle. So I'm sure there's some fancy way to like measure it and make sure you're cutting it like exactly the right angle, but I don't do that. I just start cutting at an angle, which sometimes freaks people out. But this fabric just wraps around piping, so it does not have to have super straight edges or anything like that. This is really hard to mess up. So I'm just cutting a line at a diagonal. I'm not cutting at a really extreme diagonal, again, because I don't want to waste, I want to waste as little fabric as possible. And when you end up with some of these, awkward triangle pieces like this, you'll often find these in remnant bins at stores that make curtains and custom pillows and stuff like that. But I left this piece large enough so we'll be able to use it for a section of the chair, or we should be able to somewhere, even just a little piece of the arm. So I'm going to set that aside. And then I'm going to continue cutting the fabric in strips. So I'm going to cut it in roughly 2-inch strips, maybe 1.5 inches. And again, it doesn't have to be precise. You just want to cut a strip of fabric that's large enough to be able to wrap around the cotton cording and stitch it into place. So you need to make sure that you have enough left over so you have a little bit of an allowance on the ends. And once we finish cutting all of the fabric, we're going to stitch the pieces together to make one long run of piping. And as I go along, what I can do to make sure that I have enough fabric is measure it against the piping that I cut using the chair. So I know that I have enough to cover this amount, and I'll keep sort of double checking how much more I need to cut. Again, we don't want to cut strips of fabric that we don't need. That would just be wasting fabric. To sew two ends of the piping together to sort of hide the raw edges, you line up the fabric like this. Since we cut it at an angle, when you put two straight edges together, this is how they'll meet. And it's going to be right sides together. Now with this fabric, there's really not a right or a wrong side, but this right side would be facing up and this right side will be facing down like a sandwich. And then we're going to stitch straight right along this line so that when we open it up, we have a nice seam. Now you can reduce the bulk of the seam by pressing the edges open. So if we stitch it like this, then you would press the excess. Well, let's see, let's pretend it's stitched here. And you would press the seams open like this, and that's going to reduce the amount of bulk that's there. So we're going to go ahead and wrap our piping in the fabric. If you want to pin it, you can. I like to just fold it over as I go because it doesn't matter if the edges meet perfectly or not since you don't see them. And we're going to sew nice and tight along the piping. Now the key to that is you have to have a zipper foot for your sewing machine in order to be able to get nice and tight against the cording. Because if you don't use that, then your stitch is going to end up out here and you're going to have floppy piping. And nobody wants floppy piping, right? Okay, so I'm going to wrap the fabric around the cotton cording. And here's what a zipper foot looks like. And I'm going to put that down so it's nice and tight against the cording. And then, in case you're new to sewing, when you start sewing, you want to go forward a little bit and then back and then forward again. And what that does is it sort of makes a little knot so that the thread doesn't come unwound. And then I'm just gonna, you see I'm sort of folding the fabric over as I go and pushing it down with my fingers so that it's fed into the machine nice and straight. So what kind of, okay, let me start that again. It felt like this thing was like,
I mean, it's not noticeable if it
okay.
is. Yeah.
All right. It just wouldn't be a Marion video if I didn't have to restart it at least one time. Did in sewing a slipcover, and I'm being really wordy. Let me try starting that again. All right, let me try. To make slipcovers for whatever, and I already said that. That was it. Okay. Bravo. Yeah.
I like the part in the old video where the pins fell. That was my favorite.
I know. I will spill my pins at some point, and I'll need to show that I still spill my pins everything I make. Because I really do. I spill them, and I'm like, there it goes. It's just, I do.